cultivating talent, if you're mentoring, I have this whole talk on not micromanaging, but micro-mentoring talent, right? Instead of micromanaging everything you micro-mentor them.
Hey, welcome to 10X Your Team with Cam and Otis. We're a father-son podcast where we talk with other lifelong learners about making an impact and solving big problems. And weather, for some reason. I joke with some of my clients that I've crossed a threshold in life where I've got to know what's the weather. And, I read a headline that there's a heat dome happening. And John, if I remember right, there in Vegas, you're in that heat dome. Are you in a heat dome today, John?
Actually, it's not bad today, but yeah, July and August, you don't want to be here if you don't have to be.
Yeah, well, we ain't in a heat dome. We're in a cloud dome today. And for once, it's actually clouds in the summertime and not smoke from California. So counting my blessings today.
Yes, sir. Oh, I was going to say, gosh, you talking about reaching a certain age, you're concerned with the weather. I check the weather every day. All I get is sun out here, and I still check it. I got a bird watching book. So what is it? I don't know what that says about my age.
See, I don't think it's an age thing. I think it's an outlook on life.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, there we go. Wait, go on that. Yeah, it sounds like you got some good wisdom.
Let's dive into that, John. I want to hear how that is an outlook on life. Help us out.
Oh, no, if you really, no, I think certain people are so wrapped up in, what's going on in the minutia of their lives that some of that stuff just, it could be snowing, it could be raining, it could be whatever. They're just wrapped up in their thing. And so it's good to always just realize the world is more than what's going on in your little circle.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. We can get so caught up in the struggles and battles, the personal struggles and battles, the internal ones and the ones we believe are external that we can handle, which a lot of times is very wrong. I would love to talking about battles. I'd love to just understand what made you jump from the typical doctor path that you followed, not physical doctor, what's physician? There we go. Medical doctor. There we go. That was a big word for me to come up with. Medical doctor path that you were on into the entrepreneur path, because I think that there's some of that to be a practicing doctor, you have to have a little bit, but you just said screw it and moved into a whole nother light. Tell us what happened there. How'd that get going?
Yeah. A lot of people think it was like an epiphany, or one night you're just sitting on the couch and something hits you over the head or something. But it was actually much slower and more organic. It was really a process of one door opening up another door, and I think as long as you're a lifelong learner and you don't stop after you get to a certain point and say, okay, I'm there, I'm a senior partner, I'm this, that, okay, now let's do 30 years of cruise control. If that's not your mindset. And I think every time you open one door, you don't need to know what door that thing is going to open after that, but you just have to be prepared and say, look, I don't know if I get into this where that's going to lead, but I'm okay with that. Because I think a lot of people who change their careers feel like they got to pencil it out. Okay, I'm leaving this career, and I find you don't really need to do that. You can just try this, try that, and see which one resonates with you, and then keep pushing if something feels right to you. It's literally, it's like watching grass grow. The process occurs, but you don't really know it while you're in it. Like, I don't think at any point that I think, oh, I'm pivoting. I think it was more things just kept changing and changing. So yeah, if you look back, you're like, wow, that's a big pivot. But it's like, taking a road trip and making 40 lefts and right. Somehow you got to where you got, but there was a lot of just making changes here and there, small changes, and then, small lefts, small rights, but then you get to a whole new destination, if that makes sense, if I can use a going on the road analogy.
What was what was kind of the maybe overarching theme or motivation going down that path? Not necessarily pre-planned, like you're saying, but going through that and making those individual choices that did eventually lead you to this point. There's got to be a little bit of thought about entrepreneurship or thought about business there. What was kind of that motivation?
The entrepreneurship really became because I first stumbled onto administrative medicine, and then I stumbled onto being involved in teaching, and I was a professor and clinical professor in medical school, so I taught. I got involved on the administrative side of being working for the hospital, as it were, and then I got hired by insurance companies, health insurance companies, so I got to see the world from the insurance side. So I kind of felt like I developed a satellite perspective on, let's say, the healthcare world, because when you start working with those other people and you're just not in your office seeing patients, and then you, as you gather that information and experience, you start saying, what are ways that I can make a difference now that I have this unique insight? So I think without those experiences, I don't know if I would have said, hey, let's do entrepreneurship. I think it was doing administrative medicine. I was medical director I was chief of medicine at one of the hospitals, and then I became one of the medical directors at one of the hospitals. And that gives you experiences in everything from HR to understanding the challenges financially of a hospital. And you start with every experience, it opens and broadens your mind and perspective. And so then you start digesting information differently. And then different opportunities that you may not have even noticed or seen all of a sudden become obvious to you. So having those experiences allows you to be receptive to opportunities, because if you didn't have all those experiences, you wouldn't even know there was an opportunity to make a difference, to maybe improve something in the healthcare world from a business side. There's many ways to improve something, right? You could be in the ground seeing patients every day, which is a very big honor. But you can also try to improve things by coming up with technologies and things that improve efficiency, improve quality, improve people's experiences. So there are many ways to help, if that makes sense.
One of the things you touched on, and I've heard many people over the years, and I think I've probably even said it before myself, is that I stumbled into something. And I think we say that humbly. But to become a medical doctor, you have to be very intentional in what you're doing, because that's a long path just to get to, that little mile marker.
Yeah, you don't stumble onto
Yeah,
that for
yeah.
sure.
So I'm wondering, in that reflection back, was it stumbling on, or was there a little bit of the intention, or maybe it was more of that, what you were just talking about of, well, I saw this and I read that, and that opened this up to me to see this other thing. Could you kind of part that out for us?
Well, I think people who survive medical school, residency, and fellowship, I think you have to have a certain drive and a certain not wanting just to settle and what have you. But I think that experience also teaches you to be a lifelong learner, and it teaches you to be, I always hear that, for example, doctors are bad business people, right? And that's just, it's not true. It's true and not true, right? Doctors are bad business people, but they shouldn't be, because they made it through organic chemistry, the MCATs, they made it through medical school, residency. They're actually quite brilliant people. But I think what people forget is most doctors are often working 80 hours a week. So if I was doing anything for 80 hours, I promise you I wouldn't be good at anything else, right? If I'm if I'm in my landscaping business for 80 hours a week, I'm going to be a bad business guy too. If I'm, if I'm going to be running anything or focusing on anything, it's really, so I think this thing that doctors are bad business people is true, but not true. I think it's true because taking care of patients and being committed and looking out for them and, spending 10, 12 hours a day looking after people. And then somebody says, hey, I saw, you lost money in an investment, or why didn't you research that more, or whatever. I don't think they're stupid. They're not bad business people. They just don't have the bandwidth that other people who like pick the right stocks or pick the right, real estate investment. I think they have time to drive around and look at a lot of stuff and vet things out better. I actually think doctors are quite, at least the ones I know, are quite brilliant and smart. But so I think if you channel that same strategy that got you through medical school and residency in other endeavors, I think they're a good lot to be successful if they use the same thing, as long as they're given an opportunity to break away time-wise. So when I was doing it, I went half time and then quarter time, and I actually pulled back on my clinical responsibilities to focus on that. So, and I think that's a whole conversation itself, because a lot of people have a hard time giving that up. So they try to do both. And there lies a problem, because you can't spend 80 hours a week on something and then become great at something else.
Yeah, I think, what comes to mind is almost picturing like the bell curve. If you looked at like every profession besides like entrepreneurs and rated them on their business acumen, it was going to, it's going to look like a bell curve for just about everybody. If anything, doctors, to your point, I think would probably be better on that side compared to a bunch of other, if you went to teachers and started grading them on their business skills, it's like, all right, well,
Right.
that's not what they're there for, right?
Right.
You kind of already hinted at this, but that, because you can't just do both, because you can't be great at both necessarily. I think that's true in the industry, that you have like the business aspect of it, and then you have kind of, the actual, like what I would call like the internal industry of what's behind the business. Could you talk about what it was that you saw that kind of pushed you that direction? You talked about like those doors opening and that, there's, most entrepreneurs talk about seeing a gap inside of the industry. So we're kind of already talking about the gap. What was a little bit of your process of going, okay, hey,
Yeah.
I can fix this. What's the solution there?
Great question, because being on the health insurance side, being on the hospital side, being on the clinical side of seeing patients, and then also teaching in medical schools, you really got to see it from every corner. And what you realized is there were so many inefficiencies, and there was this fallacy that healthcare technology was going to fix things. But it didn't really work out that way. I mean, we think technology is so far advanced, but most people right now who go to their doctor's office, what's the first thing that happens? They're given a clipboard with a bunch of paper. So it's not really what it is. So and now there's reasons, and I give lectures and talks about why healthcare technology is not like Amazon, right? You can't go 3 clicks and you have an appointment the next morning, right? That's not going to happen. And why is that? Now, that's a whole separate podcast that I can talk about why healthcare has that problem. But it's very difficult to get, healthcare to be like Amazon. And I use Amazon as a poster child for, great technology. There used to be a time you want to buy a hammer, you have to get in the car, you have to drive to Ace or somewhere and, go in the store, wait in line, pay for the hammer and come home. Now you need a hammer, literally 3 clicks on a mouse, and sometimes it's there that afternoon or the next day. And why can't we do that with healthcare, right? What's the barrier? And I think that was very troubling, because healthcare is the most important thing, but somehow getting a hammer is things that we've resolved. But getting to see your doctor or getting a lab test or getting a procedure you need it's like a Herculean thing to get through sometimes. And it wasn't getting better at a rate that you would expect, where other things, oh, let me get some life insurance, click a few things and I'll get a quote. Let me, imagine 10 to 20 years ago, you get life insurance. It was like a whole production. Now, you select quote will give you 10 quotes in 10 minutes and blah, blah, blah. Healthcare hasn't really come at the same rate of improvement as some of these other random things that I'm picking on.
There's so many different ways I'm thinking about, from making fun of the just getting a call back from the doctor's office. Which...
Oh yeah. By the way, yeah. I mean, I do a whole thing on my podcast where I role play calling a doctor's office, right? So you call, hi, you've reached so and so. If you're a new patient, press 1. If you're an old patient, press 2. If you need medical records, press 3. If you need the billing department, press 4. And no matter what you press, then you get another sub menu. And then after all of that, you get one more sub menu. And then the final thing is, okay, thanks for calling us. Someone will get back to you in the next 72 hours. So that is a parody on what's wrong with healthcare.
Yeah. Staying in that same vein, and yeah, I laugh about by the way, the clipboard, because now they send you an email to fill out the paperwork ahead of time, but then you show up and you got to fill it out, the same paperwork when you get there, clipboard. But
by the way, I've been a guest on so many podcasts where they want to talk about how amazing healthcare technology is, and I know it's a low hanging fruit to pick on the clipboard, but it really is symptomatic of a much bigger problem, right?
Yeah, it is.
I was just gonna say, I think if we're talking about technology saving lives, it's okay to pick on the clipboard every now and then, because you got to think all those other technologies. That's the other stuff you're talking about there. That's freaking amazing stuff, right? We can pick on these little things there, because we're not going to pick on some new surgery that cures cancer or something. Like, we can't pick on that. Let's pick on the clipboard.
No. But what I'm trying to say though is that the access and ability to get things. Yes, of course, we have many great advances, but what we've done is we've put friction into the system. So people, hey, honey, I want to get a cholesterol test tomorrow. Mm-hmm. It's not like 3 clicks and you're there. Right. It's a production. And yes, of course, we have great, oh my gosh, medications, look at the COVID vaccine, whatever. I mean, we save lives everywhere you turn. But the experience and the amount of work people have to do to get what they want, I think, is something that needs a lot of improvement. And that's what we focus on in some of the companies we do. We really focus on leveraging technology in a way that hopefully we can make inroads on that.
I had a thought in that same line of kind of, if going from the physician to the entrepreneur, and the getting patients, if you will, as a doctor, the patient and all that friction, skip over that friction, but just getting a patient to call you, right? Versus getting a client to hire you. And I'd love you to talk a little bit about that dichotomy between the two, or the similarity of them.
Yeah, it's actually, I'm gonna say it's very similar, because when you see a patient and you say, well, listen, after examining you and blah blah blah, I think you need a CAT scan. Very few patients are going to argue with their doctor, because they already feel, if you've done your job right, that you're a subject matter authority, right? And you're the orthopedic specialist, so if they say you need an MRI of your knee, you give them that benefit. And I think in business it's the same way. If there's a way you could present yourself as a subject matter authority in business, you don't get the kind of blowback that some people get. I see all these courses on how to deal with objections, and it's too much money, I need to think about it, blah blah blah. But nobody ever says that when they feel like they're sitting across the authority on the matter, right? Like, I always give this analogy: if you're meeting Michael Jordan and he's telling you this is how you shoot the ball, you got nothing to say. You got nothing. You got zero. You're like zero. You just shut up and you listen, right? You don't, well, Michael, I don't know about that. I'm not sure. I'm not buying what you're telling me. You of course not, because Michael Jordan's telling you how to shoot a basketball. Shut up. Okay. Just, you got nothing to say. Nothing. And I'm exaggerating the point, but when and we've all had this in our personal life, when we're sitting across the guy who is like the top life insurance guy or the top contractor in that city who's done thousands of homes, or the top this or that, all of a sudden you don't have that many objections anymore. I always say, if your clients are giving you objections, I don't think they must not be thinking they're sitting across Michael Jordan of whatever that thing is, because I love all these sales courses, overcome this objection, this is how you overcome that objection. Really, I think what's really missing is, I don't think you've convinced them you're the subject matter expert, and maybe you're not. Okay, but once they know that if they leave you, they're going to be downgrading, like they don't buy what you're selling, they're not going to, I always joke, they may be able to get that product that you're selling, but they're not going to get you. And if you've convinced them of that yes, there's another guy down the street, you can save a few bucks or blah blah blah, but what you're not going to get is that person. And I think people intuitively are willing to pay a premium to get the person.
All right, I gotta ask, Cam. This was a follow up to that. So, what's the white lab coat for business?
Ooh.
Oh, it's how, well, I have a whole course on it. It's how you talk. The white lab coat is how you carry yourself and how you talk, right? Because if you're really, what do doctors really do? They're trying to solve your problem. They're trying to find out what it is that's going on with you. So unlike salespeople who just want, they've got 3 things to sell, and you must obviously need one of those 3 things. How many people just say, well, based on what I'm hearing, I don't think I'm your guy. I don't think you need what I'm selling. I think the white lab coat is certainly what doctors do, is that they don't go there and just say, take this prescription whether you need it or not, or get this test whether you need it or not. Right? They look at you and say, okay, based on this, you need this. And if you believe that, like a doctor is going to see 10 patients in a row, they're not going to hopefully write for the same prescription for 10 patients in a row, because they're going to serve up what you need, not what they're selling. Right? And so the white lab coat in business is to be that person where you actually care about the person who you're in front of. You're trying to figure out what their problem is. By the way, in sales thing, find out their pain points. But, it's not like find out their pain points, but then shove whatever you're selling to them.
I'm going to make this fit in that spot.
Right. So I think the white lab coat is to really conduct yourself exactly like what a physician would do, which is listen to you, find out. Because if they get the diagnosis wrong, it'll have consequences for them, even professionally. So they're heavily, besides wanting to care, they're motivated to make sure they understand what's really wrong with you and prescribe the right thing. So you were saying that analogy to sales. The analogies simply do the exact same thing.
Except my Army doctors, when I was in the unit, it was Motrin cures all. Okay, so.
Well, by the way, the reason why Motrin cures all is, we have a whole tool belt of things that we give people who there's nothing wrong with them. In other words, when I say nothing wrong, there's statistics that say 1/3 of all visits to primary care doctors are for reassurance. Okay, so in other words, literally, if you're a doctor and you're seeing, 10 patients, 1/3 of them have, when I say nothing wrong, there may be stress, there may be some whatever, and or they're just worried, and they just want to come to someone to tell them there's nothing wrong, that they're not dying and it's not cancer, and and they need that reassurance.
Right.
So when you say that, when you give a bunch of healthy 21-year-olds in the military, like 9 out of 10 times, there's nothing wrong. Right. I mean, so I think pulling the old Motrin out is actually part of the art of medicine.
Yeah.
The art of medicine, people think there's this, I always teach this to my medical students, there is the science of medicine and there's the art of medicine. So if a 21-year-old comes to me and there's really nothing wrong with him, but he's not going to leave until I give him something because he wants to feel like something happened, Motrin, or sometimes, one of these, if they really want an antibiotic and there's, maybe an antibiotic that's old and doesn't really, we're not using that much anymore because it's still. But what I'm trying to tell you is sometimes you have to understand where the person is coming from and understand if there's really something wrong. Obviously, 21-year-olds can get sick too. So the flip side of it is your antennas got to be up and make sure you don't miss that.
Yeah, sorry. I gotta tell you, because I'm gonna be laughing through my question, so I have to mention this. And I don't know if either of y'all know him, but Chael Sonnen, the UFC fighter, one of the greatest trash talkers ever. And I remember this interview of him, and this is ever since I've seen this pops in my mind whenever I have a player injured with rugby, and you're like, "Are you really hurt?" Those kind of things. And he goes, "I bet your ankle does hurt. It's attached to a coward. That's what's wrong with it." And it's like, well, you got to treat the coward then, right? You got to treat the thing it's attached to. So that's the art of it, is the kind of personal component. To take a very fun way.
But you don't want to say that when there's actually a fracture. So the art of it is like in that analogy, is that they're really you don't want to be calling someone a coward, but they actually have a fracture of their ankle.
Oh yeah, and really we're getting close to something I had written down that I wanted to talk to you about. Which is the information gap when it comes to the medical industry. So when you think about information gap, I think like insurance is one where it's kind of used almost like a little bit like maliciously, where it's like, look, like we don't fully understand what a premium means and these kind of things. That it's like there's a little bit of a shuffling of the cups is the way I put it. It's not necessarily bad, but it's a little bit confusing, right? And then medicine is one where there definitely was, for a very, very long time, a huge information gap. And then there's this thing called Google. And now you got guys walking in who know every little thing going into it. To your point of talking about people who want the reassurance, they're convinced that there's something wrong with them that is,
right.
On the, what is it, WebMD and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Could you talk a little bit about what a good middle ground is of that? Because clearly, when I make the joke of the information gap intentionally, we don't want to go back to that of like nobody knows anything about their body and all this kind of stuff. That doesn't seem like a smart solution there, right? But clearly, also that puts y'all in y'all very broadly in a very weird spot where somebody's coming in and they already are convinced that to your point about authority, that almost challenges the authority in a weird way. There's a lot of weird problems going with that. Could you talk on that?
Yep. Yeah, I can't because I have a different perspective. I think once someone is in your office and they've accepted, of course, this is a running joke, but I heard Google said this or I looked this up. I don't get that. I don't get that because once they're in that intimate room with you and they've accepted you're the subject matter authority, and you hopefully you're going to limit the conversation to things that you are the authority. Like sometimes I throw up my arm and say, listen, you got to see the cardiologist. I'm going to send you, this is like, but if it is in my wheelhouse, right, then I don't get that sort of blowback, but Google said this or it's a running joke. People always say, I got my degree at Google or whatever. But I think, again, this goes back to this, are you sitting in front of someone you trust? Right? I mean, again, let me use my Michael Jordan analogy or LeBron James. If he says that that's how you shoot the ball, you don't say, but I saw on Google that really when you shoot, your fingers have to, you wouldn't even dare say it.
Yeah.
So I think you say that stuff when you're sitting across someone that you haven't fully bought in, that the subject matter expert, right? If I send you to the best orthopedic surgeon at Stanford who treats all the great athletes, and you walk in and say, well, you wouldn't even say I read on Google because you're like, oh my gosh, I'm at Stanford.
Right.
But I'm exaggerating the point to make a point. I think the whole Google thing has more to do with, you might say that just to your neighbor, I read on Google. But if you're really in an intimate office and you've already established that the credentials, hopefully, and the topic you're talking about is their wheelhouse, you don't get that. I mean,
Right.
so when the room is closed and it's just you and that patient, and I call that a very intimate, relationship where, look, when you're in a room with a doctor, sometimes they tell you the most intimate things about, I'm depressed or this or that. They're willing to share. I say, being a physician is one of the very few things. Think about this. And I tell this to my medical students, what an honor it is and how much you should appreciate being a physician. Because what other profession can you have a total stranger that you met 30 seconds ago starts telling you the most intimate things about their lives, right? Who else you wouldn't do that with your CPA, you wouldn't do that with your landscaper, but yet somehow 30 seconds after meeting someone, it tells you how precious and special that relationship is. And I tell my residents they should really value that and be honored that they're in that position, that that people give them that kind of respect and that kind of trust. It's a very powerful thing, and it shouldn't be taken for granted. So I think in an intimate setting like that, it's different.
I want to shift gears a little bit because, you talked about the shift to the entrepreneurship and how it was, staged on, not staged, that's not the right word, steps. It wasn't woke up this morning and said, well, this is what I'm going to do, honey. Let's go. It was more, what could you touch on one or two things that as you started to walk down that path that became an obstacle and you went, whoa, maybe not?
Yeah. Well, the thing that struck me in terms of my skill sets that I thought I didn't have that I needed to acquire was probably one of the biggest aha moments. And that is just being how to be a leader. Because people just naturally think that being a leader is a soft skill that you can acquire by just being a nice guy. I'm a nice guy. People like me. So obviously I'm a good leader, right? Because
good luck with that theory. That's all I got.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but that doesn't seem to work. Like I couldn't get in a cockpit of a 747 at 30,000 feet and said, let me land this thing because I'm a nice guy. I think you need some specific skill sets, and just because you're smart and people like you and you have a great sense of humor, that doesn't make you a good leader. And I think it's really a problem for why some companies fail or plateau, because often the leaders of those companies are simply picked by, well, it was my money, so obviously I should be the CEO. It was my idea. So that puts me as the best qualified person. No, that doesn't mean you can't be if you go get the skill sets. But we don't say it was my idea to fly to Memphis, so I should be the pilot.
You're talking about diving in on, because it's clear, you've mentioned it, we talked about it on the show a bunch, that lifelong learner approach, diving in on these things. When you hit the roadblock, it's not a roadblock as much as it is, an opportunity to go learn this new skill to overcome that.
Right.
Could you talk some about managing that mentality? Because what I mean with that is there's a dark side to that a little bit of what we kind of talk about in the show of problem-solving fever, where it's like you kind of just keep diving in on stuff, keep trying to learn things, but then you're not necessarily stepping back and seeing the big picture on it. Could you talk some about that?
If I'm understanding your question correctly, you're saying you just get wrapped up in the weeds of, whack-a-mole, where you solve one problem, then move on to solve another problem.
Right, and I think in this specific context also, and I'm going to go read 10 books and then I'm going to solve this problem, and it's like, actually, no, I just need to read a few more, and you kind of don't really spend the big picture time as well.
Well, I think that was one of the leadership skills that I was talking about, because you're not qualified I can't read enough books on doing SEO for my website to make me as good as someone who's been doing SEO for 10 to 20 years. You got to be smart enough to say, hello, I but I think that goes back to medicine. I wasn't the cardiologist. I wasn't the orthopedic surgeon. I knew how to vet out a good person that I could refer to and develop a good relationship with. So I think if I'm understanding you correctly, you don't want to do that. You don't want to be solving every problem. You have to be finding talent, finding vendors, finding partners. And I have a whole on my podcast. I have a whole podcast on how to select vendors, how to vet out vendors, how to hire talent, how to promote talent, how to build culture. That's more important than solving all these problems, because if you're cultivating talent, if you're mentoring, I have this whole talk on not micromanaging, but micro mentoring talent, right? Instead of micromanaging everything you micro mentor them with nuggets of mentoring sessions when those problems arise, as opposed to going in there and solving the problem with them. So these are all skill sets that you do where you do not want to do that. You want to find the right people. And I have another podcast. You can't be the smartest guy in every room. You just can't. You got to shut up when you find someone who knows SEO, when you know someone who knows Google Ads, when you know somebody who is really great at writing software. You have to, obviously you have to vet them out. You have to ask the right questions, but you can't pretend like you're going to read 10 books and be on par with them, because you're not.
One of the things you just touched on that it reminds me, and I'd love for you to kind of share with us about this also. One of the great things about the Army, more than the other services, is before you do anything, they send you to a school. Before you get promoted, they send you to a school. Before you go to this new job, they send you to a school. I kind of get that same feeling in the doctor world. Before you can do this surgery, you got to go get this training. Before you go do this, you got to get this kind of training. And you have your continuing education and all these other things. In the rest of the world, we don't have that. How have you, has that been a struggle with you in that, well, it's a little bit follow on to what Camden was talking about. Do I need to read another book? Do I need to go to another conference or what? How have you overcome that?
By the way, it's so funny you're talking about this military. I think in our old office, I used to say this so much that my staff put it on the wall as a military thing, where it goes, in the military, you don't rise to the occasion, you rise to the level of your training. And I tell that to my staff all the time. You're not going to rise to the occasion. You're going to rise to the level of your training. And if you weren't trained, then it doesn't really matter. So I don't know if that answers your question, but you have to get the proper training, or you have to vet out the person who is trained to do that. And I think that's our culture that I try to at least impress, that I don't want to know everything. I just want to know we have all the right people, or the best people, for the things we need to do. And if we don't, yes, I guess we could bring it in-house, and we selectively bring stuff in-house that we calculate whether it's worth it for us to become subject matter experts in-house, right? Like, I'm not going to send some of my staff to law school so we can get rid of our law firm, right? I'm not going to send people to become patent attorneys or copyright attorneys so we can bring that in-house. So obviously those are exaggerations, but you have to then, as part of the leadership skills, be able to calibrate what skill sets you want to get really good at and what you want to source out.
This brings to mind one of the things we've been kind of talking about on probably going back like 10 episodes now, Dad, is that kind of idea of the reluctant leader. I think we want to do a special on it at some point, kind of dive deeper. John, I think that, looking at medicine, and I guess specifically doctors there, it's a very interesting example for this idea of the reluctant leader. Basically, the idea being that if you want to be a leader, that ego is almost something that is going to prohibit you from being an effective leader. That you almost have to not want to be a leader in order to be good at it, right? Well, if we're assuming that there's some truth to that idea, and then you look at the field of doctors, that amount of school, the idea of like going to save somebody's life is also not egotistical. I don't mean that, but it is a very powerful thing. So it's very easy to put your ego into it if you have an ego. So I could see ways that field maybe attracts some of these people who aren't necessarily reluctant leaders. Could you speak a little bit about maybe your experience there, or what your thoughts are on that kind of idea and how it might fit into, your experiences in the medical field?
I think I follow, but would you mind just rephrasing that just a little bit differently? Because I want to make sure I give you the right answer.
Yeah, just of, looking at people in the medical field, leaders in the medical field, because it tends to correlate with the amount of training and with the ambitions of being a doctor, that can kind of correlate with maybe too much ego, and then that ego then may prohibit them from being good leaders.
Oh, yeah, now I got it. I get it. I can't argue with you. There's probably some truth to that. I think if you've gone through all that training, got the board certifications, you're saving lives, you're improving, it could get to you. But yeah, I see that. But I think you have to, at a certain point, especially if you go into business, do you want to have that sort of feeding your ego, or do you want to be a success? In other words, if you have a choice, do I want to, blow up my venture here and take it to the next level, or do I want to use this as a vehicle to, keep feeding, my ego or whatever? I don't want to say they're mutually exclusive. I suppose they're not, but on some levels they are. So one of the phrases I always use is I like to park my ego in the parking lot and then come into the building and move the ball forward for the company. So I think that's what you do need to have. You cannot be the smartest guy in the room. You can't be there. No part of talking like, oh, let me talk so people know how brilliant I am. Or at the end of the day, which really ties, I have a whole thing on employee retention and employee growth. People generally don't quit companies. They quit their bosses. And if you come in with this big ego, you're not going to be able to enroll many people into your vision. Nobody is going to want to fight the fight for you if they feel like you're in it for yourself. And I think that ego thing only gets you so far in the private sector, because people don't want to work for someone like that. People, or maybe they want to work 40 hours, but they don't want to work 80 hours, meaning above and beyond, right? So someone for a paycheck may give you, a certain product, but they're not going to give you the killer product unless they believe you're someone who is looking out for them, cares about them, and you want the best for the company so they can grow, as opposed to using that as a forum to somehow make yourself look better. So I can't imagine that being a long-term success unless you somehow luck out and hits the jackpot in some sort of endeavor that blows up irregardless of you. But if it's going to be driven by you and people have to believe in you, you're not going to enroll a lot of people with your vision. You're just not. And no one's going to buy what you're selling. They're going to see through it. If you just go into meetings and all you want to hear is your self-talk and you're discounting other people and you're trying to show how much knowledge you have. So I don't know how effective that is in a private sector where it's the results matter and there's no getting around it. How well you grow, how well your business does is a metric. You can't pretend that it's going to be different because you have a big ego.
Speaking of ego, is that ego you're parking in the parking lot is a Ferrari or a McLaren? I'm just
Well, I've got three boys, so it's an SUV. I wish I could drive a Ferrari. I have to have a big SUV to throw all the junk into it. So yeah, one of my life things is to get a 2-seater one day, but it's not going to happen anytime soon. I wanted to, but it's not in the cards.
there you go. There you go.
Yeah.
Well, I was I'd love for you to share a lesson in that, you know, shifting into the entrepreneurship again, that going from being the having a job to being CEO, and what that transition was like to go from, all right, we created a job for us and this is really fun and I'm really enjoying it and solving something, but now I need to be a CEO. Could you share some of that path?
Well, I think doctors are always like that to begin with. I mean, the premise of that is that when you're a doctor, you're somehow clocking in and out. I'm not sure that's for most. I mean, you're basically a mini CEO of your practice or whatever you're doing anyway. So I don't think there is that. Now things have changed. A lot of doctors are employees now. There's a statistic that said 20 years ago, 25% of doctors were employees. Today is 75%.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize it changed that much. Wow.
So maybe you're right, but I probably missed that transition, because when I was starting, it was 75%. And so I can't really speak to it, because I would imagine today, yes, I think there are doctors who are just clocking in and out, putting in their 40 hours and leaving. So that's going to be more of a challenge. But when I was starting my training, 75% of doctors were in private practice. And so they were mini CEOs anyway, right? If their manager quit the next morning, they had a big headache, right? Versus now, if you're an employee and the manager quits, you're like, well, I don't know what that doesn't faze me. So maybe you are right, but I think it would be more challenging now to be a clock in, clock out person and then change that mindset. But, I use that same analogy when I hire talent, especially senior talent, because a lot of times most people that we bring into our organizations are coming in from jobs that are okay with them clocking in and out, right? If I get a job at Macy's shoe department, they're not expecting me to change Macy's stock price, right? They just want me to come in, do my 40 hours and go home, right? Be nice to people, sell some shoes or shirts or whatever, and be nice to people and go home. They're not saying, oh, I need to revamp Macy's. And they're like, no, just show up and do your job. And that's it. So I think people come from that background. Many people have those kind of jobs. And then you bring them into your organization like, no. This is not one of those. This is not one of those where you clock in and out. This is, we're not asking you to work more than 40 hours, but we want you to be all in during those 40 hours. So I get that.
Yeah, boy, it's a Camden and I've been talking about the 40-hour work week a lot lately.
Oh yeah, how so?
Well, and just the arbitrariness of the timing, and how do you truly, as a leader, show and as a good leader validate that the work's getting done above and beyond the time card. The old 1950s ching time card. I'm clocking in, I'm clocking out. And how do you set your
Well,
employees up for success in that sense?
Yeah, I mean, like, one of the questions I often pose to new people we brought on board is I ask the question like this. I say, listen, I know the product you've been putting out the past few months. It's a great product. You're doing a great job. Everyone's happy. You're doing great. But I have a question for you. Cam, I have a question for you. You've been with us for 4 months. You're putting out a great product. Everyone loves you. You're doing great. But I have a question. And be honest with me. If I sold you this company right now for $1, here's a piece of paper. Sign right here. Okay. And every penny this company makes is going to go right to you because you own the company now. Tomorrow morning, are you going to come in and give me a different product? Not saying work more than 8 hours, but are
Yeah.
you going to give me a different product?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
Well, then we have a problem
Yep.
because I want that product now, even though you don't own the company. But in exchange for that, if you give me that product, I'm going to make it my life mission to make sure as we grow, you grow. If you're part of the reason this company is growing, we're going to take care of you professionally, financially. So it's not going to be just give me that product for the sake of it.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's if you want to be a senior leader and you want to grow, that's what we're again, I'm not asking you to work more than 40 hours necessarily. But are you giving me the same thing? I always like use this analogy like let's say you're renting a house, right? And you're walking through the entrance and there's a plant on the side that's struggling a little bit, like you're renting the house. You're not like you couldn't care less. Like you wouldn't even notice. I sell you the house the next day, all of a sudden, oh, but like, oh, honey, what's going on with that plant?
Yeah.
We got to check the water. And so it's this mindset. It's the same house, the same everything. You just now are looking at it differently. And I had a friend of mine who recently was renting a house and then he purchased it. The minute he purchased it, he's like, oh, well, this thing is wrong. I'm this weekend I'm going to work. Like, okay. Like nothing was really broken, but now things mattered.
Yeah.
Uh,
I think the interesting thing there with that kind of a comparison of, like renting the house versus buying it is I think where people are hesitant, and there's certain types of people that would never give the extra effort. They're just, they don't have that personality, right? But I think where some people, and we're kind of a little bit of the same culture that led to the quiet quitting and all that kind of stuff. I think what that is the counterculture from people who did do the above and beyond and then didn't get it. I saw my mom
oh,
working for years and years and she just never, she did it, but she never got the recognition. And so I think the core there, which is, it's kind of it feels like a cop out because we're a leadership podcast, but it's just a leadership problem of you're saying you're giving people this, you're saying you want that, but are you going to actually tie them to those results?
oh my gosh, I couldn't have said it better. I mean, you like literally my mind was just like whatever. That is the key, right? Because when people come there, they're going to see, oh, Susie's been here for 10 years, and they've taken care of Susie because our Bill has been killing it. As I tell some people, all my senior leaders would have to take a pay cut to go anywhere else. They would have to, just by definition, right? So I think it's not going to be that hard to figure out. Once you're in the organization, you're like, I hired a girl who was 18 years old for a scanning job for 3 weeks in the summer. And now she's second in command of one of our companies. And she's 22 now. And I don't want to tell you how much she's making, but it has to do with, are you all in? And I think if people come in the organization, yeah, you're right. If you went to your mom's company, you say, hey, someone's been here for 10 years and no one's, and they're treating it like it's their own company and nothing has happened. Yeah, that's a problem. In my podcast, one of my podcast episodes where I talk about giving that product, I always said, but make sure you're doing it for the right company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's huge.
Right? If you're killing yourself and answering emails at 10 o'clock at night that you don't have to, but you want to, and you're doing that for a few years, and there's a job opening for management and they interview someone from outside the company and go right over you. I think hello. But I go into the organization and talk to people who've been there for 10 years. Have they taken care of you? Have they? Have you been taken care of professionally? Have you been taken care of financially? Do they appreciate it? Now, you got to be careful, though, because some people think clocking in and out for 10 years should be the same thing as this sort of giving it your all kind of thing, being an owner instead of a renter. But no, for the people who are real owners, I think it's a failure in leadership not to recognize it, acknowledge it, reward it, appreciate it.
It reminds me, and Dad, I'll throw it. I'll let you wrap on this because I'm going to be vague here. But people who listen to the show a lot, they'll know the two organizations I'm talking about with my lovely wife. And when you get told when you're leaving somewhere, "Good job," that's not a good sign. That's the exact opposite of what you're talking about there, Jonathan.
Yes.
Yeah, man. Well, thanks for the crappy setup for a segue on the what did I learn there, Camden.
You learn not to go work at a place where when you leave, they say good job. Nah, that doesn't work. Sorry.
No,
Okay.
no. But what I learned, and I find it interesting and humorous at the same time. And I think I find it humorous because it's probably so true, is that 1/3 of the patients coming in are just seeking some reassurance. And therefore, Motrin is the solution. Validated medical opinion on on Motrin. That's why the Army, especially the special ops community, lives on Motrin. We need a lot of reassurance sometimes. So, Camden, how about you? What'd you learn?
For me, Jonathan, you said this of got to see the cardiologist and talking about like authority, and it's like, oh, I know this stuff, but it's like, no, you got to see go see the cardiologist for that. If I talk about it, Dad, I've been saying this since day one of the show about how big of a fan I am as a leader saying I don't know and being comfortable saying I don't know. If the freaking doctors can say I don't know, then you can say I don't know in your business. Okay, like that's a plain enough example for me.
Great, John. How about you, man? What'd you learn?
It was interesting. What I learned is even in the questions you were asking, it's really refreshing to see that people who make it their living to grow businesses and take it to the next level, we're all on the same page. All the things that I talk about, you guys talk, it's very simpatico, right? Because we talk about the skill sets to be a leader and value people and acknowledge people and all the things I can sense. So then that it is a common ingredient on people who focus on not just surviving or having a company for the sake of it, but if you really want to get to the next level, almost every topic we touched on is essential if you really want to maximize your chances for success.
Awesome. Great. Yeah, and so true. So true. Jonathan, how can folks find you, get in contact with you, see what y'all got going on next?
Great. We have a website, BaktariMD.com. That's a great place to see what we're up to, see some of our content. I have a podcast, BaktariMD. It's on YouTube and Spotify and every other platform. And of course, I'm on LinkedIn. So BaktariMD, you can certainly message us or have any questions. And yeah, those are all great ways to get in touch with us.
Awesome. Hey, John, it has been a lot of fun and learned a lot. We really appreciate your time today.
Oh, listen, I need to thank both of you. You guys have been, Otis, Cam, you've been terrific with some of the most insightful questions. Honestly, I've gotten in a long time. It makes me feel like you can really tell when someone really wants to get the information out and help their viewers. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Great. Camden, run us out.
Well, thank you for that, John, and thank you all for listening to today's episode of 10X Your Team with Cam and Otis. And a special thanks to our guest, Dr. Baktari, for joining. We hadn't given him the doctor yet, Dad. I can't believe we made it the whole show without giving him a doctor on it.
Good call.
Like you got something against doctors or something. but thank you for joining us today, John. Remember, you can watch full episodes of the show on YouTube at 10X Your Team. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to pass along to other lifelong learners in your tribe so that they can enjoy it too. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. As always, the full archive of episodes is available at www.10xyourteam.net. Thanks again, and we'll see you all next time.